I almost never feel blocked. And the reason is when I can't do it, when I'm not writing or I'm not producing, I know I'm not ready. If I'm not doing something, I'm processing it in some way, and that when I'm ready, it will be obvious.
Ever since I was a kid, I've loved exploring. These days, I'm a creativity guide, a dad, a musician with a soft spot for salsa, and a startup founder. Creating has taught me some of the most interesting things about myself, so I started talking to fellow creators, incredible chefs and artists and musicians, not just about what they make, but what they discover about themselves in the process. I'm David, and these are those conversations. I'm talking today to an amazing human, a near and dear friend, Tina Seelig, who was also a professor of mine when I was at Stanford. She was a founding member of the D.School at Stanford and is the executive director of the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, the largest endowed scholarship program in the world, and has written 17 books on everything from creativity to entrepreneurship and everything in between. She is a real mastermind when it comes to that. And so if you want to hear directly from somebody who has shaped how tens of thousands of people approach the creative process and who teaches on this and lectures on this, check this out. Having gotten to know you through the Mayfield Fellows Program and having gotten to see all the ways in which you teach creativity and inspire creativity, it was fun for me in preparing for this to look back at your own creative process all the way back to book browser and the 17 books that you've written and you being a deeply creative person yourself. And so in doing that, I came across this quote that you wrote, I think back in a Medium post, I think you put in 2015, where you had said that you know what it's like to be both driven and limited by your own vision.
Yes.
And so I'm curious what that meant for you, if you recall that quote, or what that means for you now as you hear it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. And I am so appreciative that you asked me this, because I think that we often we come up with an idea of what we want to accomplish. And sometimes those dreams are really, really big, and sometimes they're actually really little. And the frame that we have around our dream in some way empowers, but it also can limit us. When I started my first company, which you referenced called Book Browser, I just wanted, it was in 1991. So imagine before the internet was, used by the whole world. And I wanted to prove that I could start a company and sell it in 2 years. And guess what I did? I built the company and I sold it in 2 years. What happened is at the end of 2 years, as you always do with a startup, you hit road bumps, right? Speed bumps. And I had some issues that were really difficult to solve. And therefore I made the decision, you know what? I've hit 2 years. Let me sell the company. Had I had a different vision and a different goal, I would have found a way around those obstacles. I think it's really important. In fact, since you mentioned the Mayfield Fellows, I had a very poignant experience a number of years ago in class where I asked the students, I don't know if we did this together, I had them make aspirational resumes. So resumes of where they hope to be in 20 years. And it was so fascinating because there were two students in the class. It just stood out so boldly, who were both CS students, both Mayfield Fellows, both really talented. And yet the stories they told about what they could accomplish were dramatically different. One came from a very privileged background with a lot of clear, big opportunities and painted a picture where I'm going to be the minister of innovation for my country. And someone else came from a more disadvantaged background. And they are like, I want to be a product manager. Now, there's nothing wrong with each of those paths. But I realized that neither of them had really taken the time to say, okay, what's the size stage on which I want to play out my life? In fact, maybe the first one did, but the second one didn't. And say, because, David, it's the same skill set. If you're going to be the principal of your local elementary school, or you're going to be the CEO of a company. I mean, leadership is leadership, no matter what organization you're leading. And some people choose to play out their life on a very local stage. and others choose to play out their life on a global stage.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was limited at that time by the story I was telling about what I could accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it also speaks to, I mean, your whole life has been, it seems, centered around the idea of creativity in many different forms, right? You teach on it, you write on it, you've engaged in the creative act yourself in a bunch of different frames. And you've seen it through your students, like in these examples. Where do they set their sights? What goals do they set? What does creativity look like in them? And so why creativity for you? I mean, there's so many things your life could have been anchored around.
Oh,
Why
okay.
has that been it?
So it's such a funny thing because I know that it could have been anything.
Mm,
Before something is your passion, it's something you know nothing about, right? And there's so many different doors I could have opened. The story is that, uh, I mean, I am a neuroscientist by training, right? This is something that I was really passionate about. And I
yeah.
spent a lot of time, both as an undergrad and a graduate student, studying neuroscience. And for a number of reasons, I decided I did not want to stay in the lab. I did not like working with animals. I did not want to go and do a number of postdocs. I wanted to be in the Bay Area. I saw the huge uphill battle my colleagues were facing in terms of getting grants for their research. The path ahead did not look like one I was really excited about. So I started experimenting, and I changed careers every 2 years, whether I needed to or not, honestly. And the way I got into teaching entrepreneurship was really, it was very much an opportunity that I seized that I never, ever would have, I would never have defined that as what I wanted to do beforehand, or teaching creativity. It all happened because I saw a job posting at Stanford on to help build the Stanford Technology Ventures program with Tom Byers. And initially I printed it out and then I crumpled it up and put it in the garbage. Did you know that?
I didn't
I
know
printed it
that.
out and put it in the garbage
Wow.
because it was such a junior job. The job was a really, really junior job. It was like, an administrative assistant. And I had done a lot of things. I mean, it felt like it was, wow, I'm not sure that this was a good match. But I pulled it out of the garbage the next day and I said, there's something in here like innovation, entrepreneurship, education, technology. This is like really interesting to me. So I applied and I had 11 interviews. I met so many people and I realized, wow, kind of find a tsunami and stand in front of it. This was going to be so exciting.
Mm,
And so I took the job. And once I was in the building, and, as I tell my students all the time, you don't get a job, you get the keys to the building. I just volunteered for everything. And so what happened is about a year or two after I started, Bob Sutton, my colleague, basically he was teaching a class on creativity and he didn't want to do it anymore. He said, I've done this enough times. I don't want to do it. And I said, pick me. I'll teach that class. And honestly, I don't know how I figured out how to get them to say yes, but I put together a plan that was attractive enough that my colleagues said, okay, why don't we give you a try? I put a lot of guardrails and lots of guest speakers, and I was co-teaching the first year with someone else. And you know what? Teaching 10 years, that's like the equivalent of 2 PhDs. And so by the end of 2 years, I'd actually written 2 books on creativity
yeah.
based on my experiences teaching. So it wasn't something that I set out to do, but it was something that was so intriguing. And I was willing to seize that opportunity and never look back.
Yeah. Well, and it makes so much sense then that your recent book is all about luck. And having heard you speak on it at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, I'm hearing there's a deep link between creativity and luck, right? Because you crumpled up that piece of paper, and if you had left it in the trash, then you never would have gone that route. And you could call that luck or not luck, right? And that's one of the things I love about your book is I now use the word luck so differently, not as a passive thing, but an active thing. And in your case, it was like, yeah, you got lucky that you got to have this whole career, but you also didn't get lucky because you didn't just throw the thing in the trash. You took active steps to allow it to happen.
Right. And it's really interesting. A lot of people have been sending me articles and books and podcasts about luck. I'm fascinated that most people pick, one thing, like your luck is the person who's, someone you don't know yet. I think I saw a TED Talk, pass my social media feed earlier today about that. It's like, oh yeah, that's one thing. Or someone else just sent me an article about, saying yes to everything. There are so many levers that we have. I mean, as I've been studying luck for the last 10 years, I realize there's so many levers we have at our disposal to tempt positive, exciting, lucky opportunities our way. And it's very important, though, to distinguish between fortune and luck. A lot of people just conflate those terms. They think that, lucky things just happen to them. Now, yes, there are things that are either fortunate or unfortunate, which are things that are out of your control. This is very, very important to distinguish. You don't control what the weather is today. You don't control who your parents are. I didn't control whether there was a job opening at the Stanford Technology Ventures program, but I did control whether I responded to the ad. And so the luck comes from actually taking an action. And there are so many different types of actions that allow you to essentially catch the lucky opportunities that are around you.
Right. Well, and when I'm coaching folks in the creative process, many times people are at what you would call a creative block. For some reason, their writing, their music, their company feels like something isn't happening anymore. And so you could call that, you could relate that to luck or fortune or creativity or blockages. There's so many different ways of looking at it. But when you found yourself in a place that's blocked, and I have to imagine over writing 17 books and teaching many courses, there's times where you just didn't feel creatively inspired. And so what do you do when you're in those situations, when you feel blocked?
I really love that question because I almost never feel blocked. And the reason is when I can't do it, when I'm not writing or I'm not producing, I know I'm not ready. I'm very aware that if I'm not doing something, I'm processing it in some way, and that when I'm ready, it will be obvious. So for example, okay, so here's a good example. I've been fascinated by luck by a long, long time. And I talked my publisher, HarperCollins, into giving a book contract a number of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, for a book called The Physics of Luck. And it just wasn't coming together. I kept trying to start it and it just wasn't working. It was about 2018, 17 or 18. And I returned the advance. I said, it's not coming together. I'm not ready to do this. And I actually used the time to write a 10-year edition to What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, which I felt like, okay, I'm ready to do that. I want to write, but that topic is not working. And then I got asked to give a TED Talk at TED in New York. And I thought, let me give a TED Talk about luck. And that's when I started cooking up the framework of the winds of luck, that luck is ubiquitous and it's like the wind and you need to sail to catch it. And it was sort of a rudimentary idea that I could explore in a 12-minute TED Talk. I kept it there. I did not do anything else. That was like 2018 or 19, I gave that talk. It wasn't until 2 years ago, actually it's like a year and a half ago, that I said, okay, I'm now ready to write that book.
Wow.
And so I never beat myself up thinking like I was not working, I was not doing my job. It just wasn't ready.
Yeah. And there's no part of you that feels like you should be ready?
No, because
Wow.
I know I'm thinking about it. And I, often have I'll try a little framework app on my whiteboard, or I'll write a lot of a pretend table of contents and I keep playing with it. But I know that the process of that incubation process is so important. And that we need to trust that if this is a topic we're interested in, I mean, I'm really interested in luck, that I'm thinking about it and I'm seeing all sorts of examples and it's starting to come together, and pretty soon it coalesces into something. And that's why I'm so proud of this new book, because it is, yes, I spent 6 months writing it, but there's a great quote from Picasso where someone said, how come you're charging $1 million for this little sketch? And he said, yeah, this took a lifetime. And this is the same thing. It took a lifetime to write this book about luck because I've been thinking about it for so long. Before then, it sort of feels like it writes itself.
Right. And given that you said there's this feeling of I'm ready or I'm not ready, could you describe that feeling? Like, how do you actually sense that? Because I think for some people, that may not be so obvious.
Sometimes now, one of my books is called Ingenious. I am genius, Ingenious. It's a crash course on creativity. And after I got to the end of that book, it didn't feel right. That was an example where I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and I got to the end, and it didn't feel like it worked. And my husband, Mike, said to me, well, maybe you need a framework here. And then I went back to the beginning, and I was like, what's the framework? How does this all fit together? And pretty soon I kept trying also, and pretty soon I created this innovation engine, this framework that I am so proud of. And I had to then go and rewrite the whole book again.
Wow.
Using this framework. I had to start the whole thing over. So sometimes it's a framework, but sometimes it's a story. Sometimes the story, the opening story of the book is it propels everything forward. So for example, in my book, What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, the opening story is this it's become a classic $5 project where I gave students $5 in 2 hours and asked them to create as much value as possible. And it's all about framing and reframing and all the things they did. And like you get to the end of that story and you're like, wow,
yeah,
I'm now looking at the world differently. And that story then propelled me through the rest of the book and showed all the different ways in which you can essentially frame and reframe opportunities.
Right. Well, and it seems like when it goes right, meaning when you feel ready, there's this sense of pride in your work of,
exactly.
Oh, wow, I'm really proud of this framework. I'm proud of this book. And that's sort of a signal of, maybe I'm ready.
I'm ready. And there's an urgency. At that point, there's an urgency. It's like, oh, now it's ready to be born. You think about, I think of, giving birth to a baby, like there's a gestation period where it has to build, it has to differentiate, it has to get to a certain level of maturity where you go, okay, this is now ready to be born.
Yeah. It makes me think a lot about Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act. And he talks about, for him, how he views those stages of the creative process. And that sense of urgency does come in at a certain point, or the sense of sometimes it being a bit more logistical or administrative when you just need to get something across the finish line. There's a stage where it becomes pretty tactical as well.
Exactly. And I know that some people, here's a funny question I like to ask people. I'll ask you.
Yeah.
If you had to clean this will make sense in a second. If you had to clean a really, really, really messy garage, how would you go about it? What would you do, David?
I would probably start with getting the easy to remove stuff out first.
Okay. Great. So that's so interesting because different people have different answers. I would need a quick win. I would take the area with the sink and I would clean that out. And then I would take a shelf and clean that out. I would need to have small wins along the way. Now, other people like my husband, he would just empty the entire garage. He would make the biggest mess. Yeah. But when he got done, it would be perfect. He would have cleaned the floor. Everything would have been perfect. I need lots of small wins. So I think this is an example where we all have a different process. I need to get that 80% done that takes 20% of the time. And then I'm so in the process, I've made so much progress that 80% that's going to be the last 20 feels like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
Because all that stuff that happens at the end, like getting all the references and getting all the copy edited, and that whole process is a really, really, it's very burdensome and it takes a lot of time. But once you've gotten that 80% done, that feels like, okay, now we're fully committed.
Yeah. Well, I'm also sensing that you have a real dedication to your process, right? I mean, the fact that you got to the end of Ingenious, I believe you said it was, and you didn't feel like it was quite right. You found this framework and then you rewrote the whole thing, speaks to me to a certain level of dedication to something. Many people might say, well, I can't rewrite the whole book. And so what is that you're sort of committed to or dedicated to?
It's interesting. I think of this as my books are a product, right? So I'm an entrepreneur, and my product is my books. And I have a lot of pride in wanting them to be really good and useful, not just to others, but also to me, right? I then get to talk about this. I get to share it with the world. I want to have something that's a valuable contribution. And if I get to the end and I feel like this isn't actually working, it's funny. When you give a talk, you can do a lot of hand waving. But when you write a book, it actually has to hold together from beginning to end. And so the act of writing, as people often say, it's thinking. Writing is thinking, and you can't be loosey-goosey. You get to the end and it's like, this is a logical argument. It holds together. There's sort of a poetry to it. You started somewhere and you sort of build a whole story and it lands in the right place. And people hopefully at the end go, wow, I have been changed as a result of this. When I teach, my objective always with teaching, and maybe you've felt it when you've been in class, is that when people walk out at the end, they're actually changed in some way, that there is something that happens in that experience. And I hope to do the same with my books as well, that people can walk away saying, I've been changed as a result of the experience I've had of going through this process of reading it.
Yeah. I love that you say that, because I was revisiting being in Mayfield with you and being in those classes. And I was reflecting as you were saying that, which classes stuck with me the most and what led to that. And what was interesting is it was, from my memory, less what the topic was, and it was more about the energy that you brought to it. Because I think so many times when we're creating a product, a book, a talk, whatever it is, I at least can get focused on the physical thing. But I think so much of what people resonate more is the energy of the person behind it. Like the product is just a product of the person who made it. And so what's really neat is what sticks with me from our classes was more of your energy, your enthusiasm, right? Your positivity, your optimism. And like, that's what sticks with me.
Interesting. Well, you know what? I see myself as a teacher, as a provocateur. My job is not to have the answers. In fact, oftentimes, if you ask a question, I would turn it around and say, well, listen, David, what do you think?
Yeah.
How would you go about answering that? I feel like I'm there to be the provocateur and to get people thinking. I also love to start with an experience, to start with, like, let's say we're going to learn about negotiation. Yeah. Like, let's start with a negotiation where I'm pretty sure you're going to fail to reach a conclusion. And then we'll start unpacking it. You now have an emotional reaction. I believe that all learning is emotional. And if you don't have an emotional relationship with the content, you are not going to remember it. So I start with some provocative experience, and then we unpack it. What happened here?
Yeah.
What happened? And it could be, a session on ethics, and we put people in a really difficult situation where they have to make a really hard choice. And then we unpack, well, how could you inoculate yourself against this? How could you prevent yourself from getting on that slippery slope in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then it makes sense that for you, if experiences and emotions are such a big part of the journey, that at least in my case, what I left with was the emotional experience of the class, which is so different than it just being a cognitive, intellectual thing.
I think there's another piece too, is my hope is also to sort of model what it looks like, right? So a combination of modeling it and giving you the opportunity to experience it and sort of creating this very multimedia experience. I mean, why would we, information is a commodity, right? I mean, especially in this day and age, you can get information anywhere. So why would you be in a classroom? Yeah. Why would you do that? Why would you share this experience with these people? And so how do we exploit that opportunity in a way that you could never do anywhere else?
Yeah. Well, and speaking of feelings and experiences, when you think of your peak experience of creativity, of entrepreneurship, but the feeling of it, the moment, and there are probably multiple of these, where you felt like, wow, I am, like, this feeling that I'm having is one of the best feelings in my life, and you're in that creative process, I'd love to hear you just share what some of those were for you.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Writing is very much like that for me.
Okay.
There's a discovery. I mean, I'm a scientist by training, and that thrill of discovery in a lab is so intoxicating. I think that's what propels people forward. You get this like, oh my gosh, I discovered something. And writing is also a form of discovery. And um, I also am a magnet for stories when I'm writing. It's a reason I love writing books is that it gives me a frame, a focus to see the world. So if I'm writing about luck, then I just start seeing all the opportunity, all the stories. Like if you're going to tell me something about your life, I was like, oh my gosh, David, can I put that in the book?
Yeah.
Our students here at Knight-Hennessy Scholars do a whole program for first year students called storytelling, where they learn communication skills during the first quarter, and then 2 quarters, they're getting up and giving presentations and getting feedback. And all the presentations are focused on topics in our leadership model, like humility or curiosity or resilience or collaboration. So I basically am sitting there, and every story is just sort of so food for thought for me. It's like, wow, what a great story. Or when I was writing What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, here I was teaching the Entrepreneurial Thought Leader lecture series. And so every week was someone coming in and talking about their entrepreneurial journey. All of those stories I could mine. I always thought about if I was decided to take a year and, go travel around the world, I would need to have a focus. I mean, it could be like, I don't know, doorknobs around the world. It could be anything. I would need something to focus my attention. And that's why I love writing a book, because it focuses my attention in a way that feels really, really exciting for me.
Yeah. Where is that attention now? You're just on the other side of having put out a book, right? And so it's this, I imagine, this in-between space potentially.
Well, right
Or
now,
is your attention already going?
I'm mining this, because then you get it out in the world and you start seeing how it resonates. And now I'm giving a lot of talks and interviews and meeting with people. The stories that I keep hearing continually add more texture to what I've done. Also, I've already started writing another book.
Oh, beautiful.
So it's still under wraps, but I've already started, and it's due a year from now. So I have a year to dive into this new topic, which is very off-brand for me, by the way. I often pick topics that I want to learn about. For example, my first 2 books I wrote were on the chemistry of cooking. So I don't know if you know that. It was when I was in graduate school. I knew what was happening in great depth in my lab, but not in my kitchen. I made a list of all the questions I had. It was long before the chemistry of cooking was a popular topic. And I thought, I can't find the answers. I better write a book. So I started writing a book when I was in grad school. I put it down for a while. And then when I was pregnant, I picked it back up and finished that book while Josh, my son, was being gestated.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what's neat is you put the book out, and now the interest in it and the exploration and discovery, it just keeps going.
Exactly.
Because it sounds like people share stories with you about what luck has done in their life, and you're on talks and panels, and the journey just keeps unfolding.
Exactly. And it's so fun because then there are lots of new stories you hear that add a fresh perspective on the same topic, which is great.
You know, it's interesting, as we're talking about luck, creativity, I'm finding myself, if you want to try this, turning the table for a second, because one of the things I love so much in being in conversation with you and seeing you do this with other students is helping them move through blocks, right? Helping them realize that a wall is not a wall. And I imagine, especially with this new sort of view around luck, there's other ways of helping people move through that. And so we could try this out, turn the tables around, and I'd be curious, if I just bring a topic in, if you'd be open to exploring, almost coaching me from a luck creativity lens through a block, and just see where that leads us.
Great. And in fact, before we start, I just want you to notice, if you can see over my shoulder, there is a painting. I guess, I don't know what direction it is, but over where my name is, it's a map of the world upside down.
Oh yeah.
And you can only see
Okay.
part of it there,
I
but
can
I
tell
love
though.
that it shows up here. It's a map of the world upside down. And why did I put it in my office? Because I really invite people to reframe everything, to look at
Yeah.
things from a different angle. And it's sort of an invitation to say we can look at everything in different ways to unlock new opportunities. So anyway,
Oh,
just
I
love chatting.
love that.
Yeah,
I love that. You know, you saying that, and this can be a short little exercise, but I think it would be interesting to see a lot of what you're talking about in action.
sure.
So in my life, I grew up playing piano. There's a piano, you can't see it, but right here. I played since I was 7. A question that I've been sitting with in life is around who am I in terms of how it relates to being a musician or an artist?
Mhm.
Because it hasn't been a primary part of my identity, you could say, but it's been a huge part of my life. And it's one of the things that brings me the most joy and feels like the most deep and authentic expression of myself. And so, yeah, I've been sitting with that question of like, so what role should it play in my life? And how big of a part of my work and identity should it be?
Great. So one of the sort of very simple little framework that I put in What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20 is these concentric circles. Now, this other people have done this in different ways, but was my way of looking at it is you can have your passions, your skills, and the market, right? The center is the market. Around that is your skills. Around that is your passions. Now, if something is your passion, but you're not skilled or not, there's no market, then you can be a good fan. Like I could be a great fan of jazz because I love it, but I'm not skilled at it and nobody's going to pay me to do it. It could be that I'm passionate about it and I'm skilled at it, but there's no market. Well, then that's a hobby. Something could be something you're skilled at and there's a market for it, but you're not passionate, then it's a job. But if it's something you're passionate about and you're skilled at and there's a market, then that's like a career or a calling. And so people are very, very fortunate when they basically hit all three of them. But there are a lot of people who have a job, right? They are skilled at something and people pay them to do it. You know, maybe they're an accountant and they're really good at it, but they're not passionate about it. But you know what? I can do someone's taxes. But they've got a hobby on the side, playing jazz.
Yeah.
So I think you have to think about where it fits into this bullseye. Is it you're good at it? I know you're good at it. So you're skilled and you're passionate, but is there a market? And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to create a market, right? Right. So especially as a musician, you need to create a market for your work.
Yeah.
And are you willing to put the time and effort into doing that? Because
Yeah.
that's a really hard thing to do. Or are you comfortable saying, you know what, this is going to be a hobby and I'm going to have, make my living in other ways.
Mm.
Was that helpful?
It was so helpful. Well, and it's also getting me to wonder, I've heard different advice about whether to or whether to not earn money from the thing that sort of brings you the most joy, because then there's this burden associated with it. And so when I'm thinking through those concentric circles, I wonder where that fits in, is if there's something that feels like a deep creative passion, but you're worried about tying money to it. I think a lot of creative people sometimes ask this question of, do I want the burden of making a living to be associated with what I love?
I think there's a false dichotomy here.
Mm.
So you could say, I'm going to try it. I'm going to have my day job. And then you are doing music on the side and you're playing clubs and you're putting things online and you're seeding the world with it. Meanwhile, you have this bread and butter job that allows you to pay the bills.
Mm.
Your music might at some point reach escape velocity where you now say, hey, guess what? I can quit my job and focus on this. I think that is often the safest and most comfortable way to go, as opposed to saying, I'm going to throw everything out the window and just focus on being a musician.
Yeah.
Some fields it's easier to do than others. So I mean, it's true for anything, right? You could be a writer. I have a day job, right? I run Knight-Hennessy Scholars. I ran the Stanford Technology Ventures program. Writing books is a hobby for me. I think of it as a hobby. When it makes money, that is so great. But I'm not worried about whether you're going to go buy a book, which I'll make, between 50 cents and $1 a book. You have to
Right.
sell a lot of books to pay your rent, right? To pay your mortgage. I mean, you're going to need to sell a lot of books. So then there's a lot of pressure. But if I can look at it as this is something that is icing on the cake in my life, then there's not the same pressure.
Yeah. Well, and was that a conscious decision for you? Because you had mentioned that your books are like the act of writing is something that you love and it's one of your peak creative experiences. And so was it a conscious choice for you to say I'm not going to make a living by being an author?
Well, there were times in my life where that's what I was doing, right? But I also was fortunate enough that I had a spouse who was, helping to pay the bills. So I could say, I'm home with our young child and I'm writing books. And it certainly was a contribution but it wasn't something we were counting on month to month as our income.
Yeah. But was there a point where you wondered if that was the sort of path you wanted to go, or was it?
No, I
Yeah.
was always been something that, I didn't want to feel like it was pressure that I needed to write
Yeah.
something, that
You
if
want
I
it to be
wanted
a
to do
hobby.
it. Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I don't know if that would work for you to say, listen, I've got this wonderful music that I'm doing. It is, there are lots of people who are fabulous musicians who do it on the side and have a band and play different gigs and have a great experience. And who knows, maybe you get discovered. Someone
Yeah.
says, great, this is wonderful. Or you've got a YouTube channel that you monetize and it brings in, you go, listen, I'm going to pay for my family vacation every year with the money that we make from my music.
Right. Right. Well, the other interesting thing I see is this concept of practice grounds. It's like, what are the spaces in your life where you get to work through things and practice things that aren't as high consequence as where you make your core living? And I see this a lot, like when I'm coaching CEOs, they will have something you could call it a hobby, but because through playing a sport or writing or doing pottery or singing, it's this space that they can work through vulnerability or work through fear or other experiences, but not have it tied to making a living. And so I think there's also a beautiful way that those hobbies play a role in life too.
There's also another thing that people don't often tell you, and it's usually more salient for women than for men. But when you have a child, there is this sort of liminal space when they are young where your primary responsibility is like keeping this kid alive. And if you have dialed back your professional career a little bit, there's a lot of space for experimentation. And the world gives you a lot of grace. You don't have to feel like you need to explain to people what you're doing. And like, oh, during the 10 years when Josh was little, I did so many different things, experimented with so many different opportunities. It was such a meaningful collection of experiences that allowed me to start seeing where I wanted to start putting my energy once he was old enough and I decided to go back to work full time.
Yeah.
So I think that you can give yourself the gift. Now, it's, as I said, it's often women have that sort of, it's a clear period of time when you have a young child. But I think men too, you can give yourself a window of time to say, you know what, I'm going to do a few years of experimentation.
Yeah. I mean, with a 14-month at home, I've been experiencing that recently, that there's this huge shift in life, and it can both get very full with changing diapers and bottles and all of that. But also there's these moments of space that sometimes just open up.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's
Exactly.
quite different.
Also, one of the things that's really helpful if you have a partner is that you can alternate who is responsible for paying the bills.
Yeah.
Mike and I alternated at the beginning of our marriage every 2 years, where I was working as a management consultant for 2 years and he was starting a new company. And then I was home with our baby and writing books, and he was working. So we alternated, and it was a really, really very deliberate for us to say, right now, your career is leading and I'm following, and then we're going to switch in a couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is empowering because earning a living and having creative pursuits are both really important.
Exactly. And being very clear that, you know what, right now, like you lead with your creative process, and I'm going to be the one who's going to be responsible for making sure that, we can keep the lights on, but it's going to be your turn.
Yeah. Mm. Well, just as we're getting towards the end of our time here, I'm also curious if young Tina were to see you now and everything that you've done in your life, right? Young, curious, creative, playful Tina, what do you think she would say?
Oh my goodness. Yes, it's because I'm very, very old now. Now that
Mm.
I'm a grandma, I definitely count as being old. No, but that's
You've
like the
had some
best new
beautiful.
job. That's the best new job ever. But I know that if I were to see myself now, I would have been completely shocked and totally delighted. I would have had no idea how I went from where I was. In fact, here's a funny story. After What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20 came out, I got a letter from someone, an email from someone who I'd known when I was 15 years old. And he said, "Is this the same Tina Seelig who went to this, summer school with me back when we were 15?"
Mm.
And I said, "Yes." And I knew this guy had written me a number of letters. We were friends and we wrote letters to each other. So I found a box of letters and I started going through this box, looking for the letters from this old friend. And in the box, I found a letter I had written to myself on my 20th birthday. Now, this was uncanny, right? My book, What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, had just come out. And here's a letter I
Wow.
had written to
Wow.
myself on my 20th birthday. And it said, basically, I am so lost. I have no idea where I'm going. I have such goals for myself. I have no idea how I'm going to get there. I feel like I don't even know what direction to step in order to reach the goals that I have. And I realized that that book I wrote was literally for my 20-year-old self, because the book is about doing a lot of experimentation, trying lots of things, keeping what works, being willing to take some risks and willing to fail, to getting off the predefined path, and how to do that, how to do it in a way that allows you to start navigating and learning through those experiences.
Wow.
So yes, if I do know, because I found this letter when I was that age, I would have been so excited to see how the world was going to unfold, and I would have had no idea how I was going to get there.
Wow. I mean, speaking of stories and you being drawn to stories, I can imagine you opening that box right after you publish this book. And it's like, what a story. I mean, for that to come together in such serendipitous ways.
Right. And in fact, when I did the 10-year edition of the book, I opened it with this letter, the letter
Yeah.
I had written to myself at 20.
Yeah.
Eh,
So is there anything additional since you've written that book that you would now share in hindsight with that younger version of you?
I think the most important is to trust the process. As I talk about in my new book, luck is a long game. You plant so many seeds early,
Mm.
and many of them take years or decades to bear fruit. And to know that if you're trying lots of things, keeping what works, building trusting relationships, experimenting all the time, and fostering the ability to bounce back when things don't work, that it will work out.
Yeah.
You will find yourself in some exciting places, and that one of the things I said to Josh And I know you guys went to school together, so that's kind of fun to be talking to you now. But when he was in high school, I said to him, you know, I'm here to help you in any way you want. I am not going to be a pushy parent because I had a very pushy parents. But I want you to know that the choices you make today determine the choices that you will have tomorrow. And I think that's one of the important lessons I wish someone had said to me at that age. It's like, it's going to work out, but think about the choices you're making and how they're setting the stage for the opportunities that you're going to have in the future.